the whole concept of hidden weight gain factors is one that I started to review and put a spotlight on with a book called The Fat Flush Plan. Is that a book some of you are familiar with in the audience? So I had been doing a program for many years which was a cleanse, a kind of detox when detox wasn't cool. This was about 20 years ago. And I found that different aspects of that program truly worked miracles when it came to weight loss. When it came time to do a full-fledged book out of my 2-week fat flush, I had to put a magnifying glass over all my protocols and figure out why those protocols really worked. So I am going to now express to you what some of those underlying hidden weight gain factors were that made that book so successful, and also why, in fact, there is such an urgency. And I think, as you can see from some of the statistics that are here, we've got a problem in this country. And I believe that that problem, as you will see with me, is more than calories in and calories out. It's not just a matter of overeating and under-exercising and it's in the genes anymore. I think that there are other factors, some of which will be surprising to you and some of which will be recognizable, that are at the underlying cause of the epidemic. And as far as I'm concerned, obesity has become an absolutely huge health concern these days because we have increasingly become overweight throughout the world, and that, as you know, is going to raise the risk of all of your degenerative diseases, whether that's diabetes, that's cardiovascular disease, stroke, and even certain types of cancer. Well, according to the World Health Organization, there are now more than 1 billion adults worldwide that are overweight. That's 1 billion adults that are overweight and more than 300 million that are obese. And because this is now a global pandemic, not just relegated to the United States, I truly think we need to look at all the potential contributors to overweight beyond the diet, the exercise, and your inheritance. Truly, worldwide, obesity is on the rise. But thankfully, there are many experts who, like me, are beginning to think a bit outside the box. And they're looking at a wide range of possible causes to explain this whole worldwide obesity challenge. And so for a little peek at what's going to be in store, I would like us just to take a look at this first quote that is from Dr. Bailey Hamilton, who is a British expert in human metabolism, and she coined the phrase chemical calories, and it's one that you're going to see in the literature as the years progress, so I think it's wise to make a note. We will now have chemicals that will be known as chemical calories. And chemical calories, in my book, truly explains how everyday pollutants that you and I come across on a daily basis in our food, in our water, and our environment start to impact your metabolism. They will prevent and will actually, rather than prevent, they'll actually encourage food cravings and inhibit the way your body burns body fat. So they actually put a damper on metabolism. Years ago, these chemicals were known as endocrine disruptors, another big name that you will hear about repeated now. But for now, we are going to take that connection between the endocrine disruptors and call them chemical calories, or obesogens, another new name in which chemicals that promote obesity have now been linked. And this interesting definition in terms of chemicals that are promoting obesity really is new. It came from Bruce Blumberg at an American Association for the Advancement of Science big meeting. This was a meeting in which obesity and exposure to the endocrine disruptors was first discussed. And might I say that it was discussed and not welcomed with open arms, particularly from the chemical manufacturers themselves. So you got a problem right here in River City, and when we start to determine what those specific obesogens are, I think you'll be absolutely amazed. In terms of the entire concept of the hidden weight gain factors, what I've tried to do is outline the basic areas that I think we need to discuss. And these are the areas that I truly believe you need to be aware of. Now, several of them I have discussed in my books. For example, you'll take a look at number 2, the fear of fats. I talk about that in practically every single one of my books, but I also introduced this in a book that many of you, I believe, are familiar with, which is Your Body Knows Best. Another factor that we need to be cognizant of when it comes to obesity is your liver, probably the most underappreciated and underrated organ of all times, which, by the way, does over 400 marvelous processes and activities on behalf of your system. Waterlogged tissues is another reason for the hidden weight gain factors. And as we move through the presentation, we're going to take a look at food allergies, of which gluten is most definitely, the color bear for that arena. We'll be taking a look at certain medications that I know you come across, some of you in your practices, and how one little dose, let's say, or a shot of Depo-Provera can give you 30 extra pounds of weight that you're not going to be able to get off. And we'll be touching base again with areas that you're perhaps a little bit more comfortable with and familiar. The concept of excess insulin and excess inflammation. As we all know, that inflammation is really the underlying cause of most degenerative disease in this country, but we're also learning that it has a dramatic impact and connection to obesity. We'll talk a little bit about stress and that very important hormone that's connected to stress, which is known as the big C, or cortisol. And similar to insulin, both insulin and cortisol are stress-promoting hormones that are fat-promoting hormones as well. We'll then talk about the lack of support, that people can't stay on a program no matter how good it is in terms of even getting to the underlying causes unless they have some vehicle for support, whether it's family or friends or virtual support on the internet. But more importantly, I'm going to hit on an area that I know is very important for you, and that is the importance of the environmental toxins. Because as far as I'm concerned, that really is the latest, greatest, and most controversial, and certainly the most preliminary area of all. And so when we take a look at these 7 areas, I would be very remiss if I didn't talk to you about a new area, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's the area called infecto-obesity. Is that a term you here in the Northeast are familiar with? Infecto-obesity. Good. Then let me be the message of the bearer of good news, and that is that we are now looking inside the gut and the beneficial versus pathogenic bacteria to take a look at how that is connected to obesity. In other words, what we're finding, and there were 2 very interesting journal articles that appeared in Nature, there may be a connection between the disruption of intestinal bacteria, perhaps due to the overuse of antibiotics, and that impacts an internal balance of power that has a lot to do with the inability to extract nutrients and calories from food. Now, this is absolutely new stuff, but I must tell you that this whole arena of infecto-obesity is quite the coming thing. So just like you'll be seeing words like obesogen and chemical calories, be on the lookout for the concept of infecto-obesity and the fact that infections in your gut may in fact be impacting your waistline. Now, there is an infection which is known as the obesity virus that lives in the gut that you can actually get tested for. And it's a test which is known as AD36 that's now being run in some of the most prestigious labs in the country. So if you test positively for this, and young children can be tested, then you know you've got a predisposition to overweight. Now, beyond just these, now it's 8 counting infecto-obesity, beyond these 8 sections, there is another underlying cause of obesity that I want to bring to your attention, and that is the concept that parasites in the system may also be making you fat. And this is very much connected to what's in the gut. And that is the understanding that we are now learning, that based upon research that we have found at Penn State, which has looked at the dragonfly, we're now learning that the dragonfly's metabolic diseases will provide a clue to human obesity. And that dragonflies that are infested with certain parasites, very similar to parasites that can live, we thought, non-pathogenically in the gut, have now been found to slow down the body's ability to metabolize fats and are directly related to obesity, type 2 diabetes, as well as other metabolic disorders. And so when it comes to looking inside the gut, we are now learning that the balance of your beneficial to the pathogenic bacteria, and that would be an 85 to 15% ratio, as well as the uninvited guests that you could be carrying in your system, which include parasites like amoeba, giardia, cryptosporidium, and blastocystis hominis, and hopefully these are names that are familiar to some of you, may not only be impacting diseases like arthritis or even problems like fibromyalgia and allergies, but that they can also dampen the metabolism through mechanisms that we're now looking into. So looking at the entire gamut and having the best evidence-based labs is going to be key for any and all of these areas. When it comes to infecto-obesity, I'd like to share with you the name of a lab that I have now been using that is absolutely incredible in terms of finding some of these underlying causes. The lab is known as Diagnostex. And for those of you that need more information, I'm going to have you perhaps email me at Anne Louise at annelouise.com. But it is a lab that takes the most comprehensive stool sample to find antigens. It also takes saliva samples, which will find antigens to 7 or 8 of the most prevalent parasites. And when I get a client that cannot lose weight, or has a disease that I don't have a clue about, the first thing I do is I look at their poop. Why would you be looking in that place? Because that's going to tell you, for heaven's sakes, what's living in the gut. And since the gut contains more than 75% of the immune receptor sites of the body, you're going to want to know what's going on with that individual. We have found that migraine headaches, problems with insomnia, as well as problems with tumors, problems with the brain, as well as a wide variety of digestive ills, from irritable bowel syndrome to Crohn's disease to anything in between, is very much created and caused by some sort of parasitic organism that has no business being in the gut. And just the way bacteria are now becoming antibiotic resistant, guess what's happening to those organisms? Not only are they becoming antibiotic resistant, but they're also becoming herb resistant. So we've got to become real creative in terms of the ways in which we get rid of these underlying critters. Now, I wrote a book to support that information, and that book is called Guess What Came to Dinner? Parasites and Your Health. So back to the environment. When we take a look at the environment and the chemical uses and how that connects to obesity, I think what we can find, very interestingly enough, is that when Dr. Bailey Hamilton looked at trends between 1930 and 2000, what she found, which is categorized right up here on stage, and actually published in her work in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine way back in 2002, is that there is a connection between the chemicals in the environment as well as global obesity. And the name of her article, interestingly enough, was called Chemical Toxins, a Hypothesis to Explain the Chemical Obesity Epidemic. Basically, what she saw was that the production of synthetic chemicals and the percentage of overweight people in the United States during the 20th century were clearly connected. So there was something in terms of the increased use of chemicals, whether that was in the environment or in the animals that we consumed, that also connected to the rising levels of obesity that are so prevalent in this day and age. Now, what I later learned was that there was another study that was done in 2004 that truly underplayed and corroborated what Bailey Hamilton came up with herself in 2002. And that was that the University of Quebec, researchers there showed a dramatic relationship